Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a Soka researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy the conversation.
Hi, my name is Neera Sameda. I am based in New Jersey. What I do currently, I'm the director of customer success and college coaching for a private college consulting company. What that really means, I support high school students throughout the entire college admissions process and then also into the first semester of college. We're not just about, college admissions, but really student development, that long-term growth and development. So a four-year program typically starts freshman year. And so we'll see a little bit of that student development and then into the college admissions process as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Neera, for joining me on the podcast. And I love that you work with young students, right? Supporting them in a very pivotal point in their journey as they're kind of figuring out what the next big step is, but also developing them, right? Because sometimes we get so caught up in the end,
Yeah.
and we don't really understand the actual journey, like the means to get to that end.
Hmm.
So that student development part, I think, is so crucial, and not having it be just like packed into one year, their senior
Yeah,
year, right? These students have a lot of stress that they're going through already.
absolutely.
And so kind of like spreading that out. And then I would imagine also providing them the kind of mentorship piece, right? Building stronger connections with them and setting them up for success, whatever that might mean. So,
Yeah.
college admissions, it's near and dear to my heart as well. I did a little bit of it when I was working at my alma mater. I was an admissions counselor, so I know some of the terrain that you navigate. But I'd love to hear more, like in greater detail, and also about like what got you to this point of supporting students in this capacity. So I'd love
Yeah.
to pass it over to you, Neera. If you could share a little bit more about some of the twists and turns of your journey, what ultimately got you to do the work that you're doing right now. So yeah, love to hear from you.
Okay. So the journey for me really we'll backtrack a long time ago, right? When I was born, when I was a kid. I'm not gonna go through, every moment of life, but that's really what set the tone. So I was born in Trinidad and Tobago. That's where my parents are both from, most of my family is from. We immigrated to the US to New Jersey and then never really left. When I was, a young kid, through about 3 to 5 years old, and that, right, being an immigrant growing up was always a really big part of my identity. We also grew up, very low income, like a lot of other immigrants coming to this country. My parents were really young when they had me, early 20s, new country, not a lot of support. And so, right, the American dream, that's the big thing that motivated them. And that, to me, as the oldest child, as the older daughter as well, so I have a younger brother, a lot of the expectations and pressure to be successful, to be smart, go to college, get a good job, and help take the family out of poverty, things that are very, very common for a lot of immigrants, were a lot of what my experience was. I loved science when I was a kid. I just loved people, and I was pretty naturally smart. So all of that led to, the typical three choices a lot of immigrant kids have: doctor, lawyer, engineer. And because I liked science so much, it's like, okay, go be a doctor. That makes the most sense for you. And that was really the narrative that I heard all throughout, growing up and then especially in high school. We'll pivot a little bit to my own college admissions journey. I was part of a college access program in high school called the Princeton University Preparatory Program for high achieving, low income, typically first gen students in the kind of Princeton, New Jersey greater area. And that is really what helped just open my options for college, learning about the college admissions process, what kind of colleges were out there and where opportunities. So I was really fortunate. I got into Duke, my top choice school. I got a really great scholarship to attend. And so it was a no brainer. Our amazing pre med program as well. And so I started college in 2016 as a pre med student at Duke. Really, really liked my time there. Switched very soon into a psych pre med major. I started as bio as I thought, okay, I'm doing so much science. I want to do something that's, a little different. I started enjoying understanding how people develop and just knowing those backgrounds, child development, career development, things like that. Okay, we get to the end of college now. It is 2020, which we all know what happened in 2020, and so my last semester of college was in the during the start of the pandemic. Was a weird, hybrid. We're trying to figure out what's going on. First time mass transition into Zoom. During that time, still pre med. I'm preparing for and studying for the MCAT. We'll fast forward a little bit more, and I started medical school in July of 2021. So I started at New York Medical College, and still just following along with the expectations of family. I'm still working towards medicine. I think this is really the only option for me. And now I'll backtrack a little bit slightly as well, that when I was in college, I did some college access work, some college admissions work for the PUP program that I was in with another college access center in Durham when I was at Duke. And I loved that work, but I never thought of it as a career path. It's just something I love doing, love working with students like myself. But when I was in med school, taking the classes, I'm enjoying learning, but I don't like the program. I'm not finding that personal fulfillment and passion that I see in a lot of my peers and my friends. So I really started questioning, did I make the right decision? Was I just making this decision the entire time for my family, for my parents, and had a lot of really tough conversations? Stuck out the year of med school, told myself I owed it to myself. I worked so hard to get here. Med school is so many people's dream. I got here, I put in the hard work. Let's try to stick it out. Get involved, see what you can do. And I did that for the year, but it didn't feel right. And so I took an official leave of absence for med school, July of 2022. I cried a little bit for a few months about not having a job and not knowing what I was going to do next, and started thinking about, okay, where do I want to go? I want to go into higher education. I know I want to work with students, want to do something that's not really teaching, but more maybe advising, development. These are the things that I'm thinking. Applied to a bunch of jobs in the New Jersey area, got a job at the College of New Jersey working in the admissions office, but specifically for the Education Opportunity Fund program. And so I know I've mentioned a few times, probably in class, you may or may not have heard me mention the EOF program before, but it's a New Jersey state funded program for students from low income backgrounds who need support going into higher education. They have the drive, the motivation, and the potential to do really well, but not as much of the support. And so that to me was a little different than the typical admissions process, because this really niche subset of students we're looking at, a lot of minority students, a lot of first gen immigrant students, and being able to help give them the access into college was, it aligned with a lot of my personal goals. Did that work for, about 2 years. I started at Harvard, in May of 2023. So I'm working at TCNJ, having a good time, enjoying working with the students, but it felt still a little too transactional for me. I didn't have as much connection with the students as I wanted to have. So with that, I just started looking at other jobs, not too seriously, a bit casually. Thought I would go into like a program coordinator position. Very quickly realized I did not want to do academic advising, but maybe career development, student development, things in that realm. But then really, I kind of pivoted really with where I thought I was going to be, because this past fall, when my employer now reached out to me on LinkedIn, said, "Hey, I'm hiring for this position." I said, "Hey, why not? Okay, let's take a look, see what it's about." And went through the interview process, ended up being a really good fit, specifically because it's a director level position. And so I recognize I'm still pretty young. I'm still really early in my career, and in higher ed, there's a lot of steps you have to follow, right? So admissions counselor, it's an entry level job. The next position I would have gotten would have been something like an advisor or a coordinator or a development specialist, not really an assistant director, associate, or even a director level position. And I knew that. This job now, and I'm moving away from higher ed. I work on the other side of the table now, doing the college admissions advising and consulting, but I'm also leading a team of coaches. I'm also managing a curriculum. I'm overseeing hiring processes. I'm doing data collection. So, a lot of leadership that I'm able to get out of this role that is really just helping me grow, one, professionally, but also personally, learning just how to work with more people, a little bit more leadership skills. So, that was a very long ramble with a lot of things going on, but that's kind of what brought me here. I'm sure I can talk a little bit more specifically about my job, but that's kind of the big picture of how I got to what I do now.
Wow, thank you so much, Neera. And I feel so we just completed our master's program at Harvard
Yeah.
together, right? 2 years. It was an online program for the most part. But yeah, I've hadn't had the time to like sit down with you and
Yeah.
really hear more of your story. And it's incredible. It's really beautiful the efforts from, your parents, right, initially coming to the US, your own journey in terms of like kind of making sense of like what is the American dream for myself, what is being asked of me by my parents, but then ultimately, as I think you shared in your story, realizing that you need to kind of take ownership of your own decisions and kind of listen to your own gut as far as what's really going to like light me up in terms of
Yeah.
like the passion, like the work that you do, what is a best fit, and being able to give yourself the kind of like wiggle room to make your own way, and going from like med school
Mhm.
to now college advising and like college admissions. It might seem completely different, but I think all of the skills that you've accumulated over that experience is applicable because you've been able to get into like the top schools in the US. So there's a reason for why you were
Yeah.
able to do that. So in some ways, it's like you can say from your own background, like, oh, I put in the hard work. I know the strategies, the ins and outs of it. Now you're just kind of like applying that into an actual program where you can now, like in the leadership piece of it, work with others to offer even more opportunities for like
Mhm.
minorities, low income, again, something that you've experienced while you were growing up, and that I'm sure you find quite fulfilling, not just in the day to day work and building of skills, but the bigger picture of like, oh, this is the impact that you're wanting to make, and you're just at the beginnings as well. So
Yeah.
so exciting, because there's so much more, right, that you can continue to grow into as like a director role, but then even beyond that too. So you strike me as a very ambitious person. So I'm
Yeah.
sure that there's a lot going on.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like I guess one of the follow up questions that I'd love to hear a little bit more about, because you started with the fact that you were born in Trinidad and Tobago,
Yeah.
and and I imagine you left and immigrated with your family at a relatively young age.
Mhm.
How old were you, more or less?
Yeah. So I was less than 5. I don't know,
Okay.
know exactly how old I was. Don't remember quite, but yeah, less than 5. So very young.
Okay, because I'm just curious about like some people like they still have like memories from
Yeah.
growing up in like where they were born and then
I have
moving, anything
some
like
very
that.
light ones, not a lot of the moving process and what that was like. I have some memories from back in Trinidad when I was younger, a lot of early memories of just kind of living in the US. We moved around, we kind of bounced from couch to couch from, some other family members who were here. But something really, I guess not really that unique, but something my parents always really cared about is that, right? We didn't grow up with a lot. They,
Mm,
I mentioned they struggled a lot financially, but always wanted my brother and I to still be connected to our roots. And so
mm,
we would actually go back to Trinidad every summer as kids from I think when I was about 7 or 8 years old, really after my brother was born. I'm 5 years older than him. So he was born in the States. So I was definitely less than 5. And then, another year later, and then my brother was born.
mhm.
But from the time he was about 3 and I was about 8 years old, we would go back to Trinidad every summer with my grandparents who would go. And so, really, from June to August, we lived in Trinidad every year, and then September to May, we're in school in the U.S. So we grew up in America. We grew up going to schools here, but then every summer had 3 months back in Trinidad, still able to connect with our culture and our roots and our family down there. And that was one thing my parents always prioritized for us because they didn't want us to lose that piece of our life.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And when you would go back to Trinidad and Tobago, what was I don't know, from your like childhood memories, the highlight? Was there
Yeah,
any exciting point of like, oh, this is what I want to do over there, or this is what I really like? Yeah.
honestly, it was maybe just going to the beaches, just the the community and the vibe is Trinidad. It's very much more communalistic than it is
Mm,
in the US. We'll go to the beach and there's just kids playing, soccer. We'll just go join with anyone. Can feel like people are, I don't want to say people aren't friendly here, but it's a lot more like you'll just pull up on someone, they're doing a little bonfire on the beach. You're like, hey, can I have some snacks? And like, yeah, of course, come join us. And having the comfort to do that, it really just felt kind of like a different world. And I think for
mm,
us, it's like fun and novel, right? We're away from our parents for 3 months or having a good time. It's just going all around, seeing the family, hanging out with our uncle who lived in Trinidad still. And so a lot of that, I don't think there was anything big or grand we necessarily looked forward to. It was just seeing the family we hadn't seen, getting to go to the beaches, hanging out, enjoying summer.
yeah, yeah, and valuing your culture by like having your children like go back and have
Hmm.
that exposure, I think is so wonderful and so amazing because you're literally navigating two different worlds, right? Even
Yeah.
from like the description of like one is more individualistic, one is more communalistic, like that's already quite significant and probably
Hmm.
raises some questions of like when you go back, there's that reverse culture shock of like kind of readjusting and being like, oh, okay, now I need to switch into a different mode. And
Hmm.
maybe it can feel a little bit clunky, but I'm sure over the years, and then New Jersey is quite ethnically diverse as well.
Yeah.
You kind of understand like, oh, there's something else right going on here that I need to be kind of more mindful of and
Hmm.
sensitive of, and yeah, it's just kind of noting some of those differences because
Oh,
big
one
melting pot.
thing I
Mhm.
remember actually, one thing we always looked forward to, really food based. So there's two
Mm,
things we always looked forward to. The first is street food. It's doubles. It's like the Trinidad classic street food that we're known for. So really, what it is, it's two. We call them bara. It's like a fried dough, a thin sheet of fried dough,
mm,
and then there's curry chickpeas inside. So you'll just like hold one in your hand, got the chickpeas and stuff, and then a lot of chutneys and seasonings, so like a mango chutney, a tamarind chutney, sometimes some homemade pepper sauce. That was the first thing. I was like almost always the first thing that we got. And my grandpa, really all through his life, and my parent or my mom growing up, he was a vendor for the double. So up the hill from the house where they used to live, he would sell, and so that was one of the things we looked forward to. And then on the beach, one of Trinidad, what they're also well known for is a bacon shark, is another um, also similar fried dough, but a little different, a little more fluffy, and then fried either mako shark, typically, sometimes it'd be catfish. And so it's pieces of fried shark inside, and the toppings, it's like pineapple, it's cucumbers, it's tomatoes, lettuce, onions, and a bunch of the chutneys and sauces as well. Those were two things we always look forward to, and surrounding food.
yeah, food's so important, and
Yeah.
now I'm getting like hungry. And I've never tried like a mako shark or
Uh-huh.
but like all the seasonings and like the sauces, like the
Yeah.
spices that you're putting on top of that, just sound like amazing. So I think that's also another big draw. Like I remember when I was like living abroad in Brazil, I would like always miss very specific foods from
Hmm.
where I grew up. So that makes a lot of sense. But so the next question that I wanted to ask about is like kind of maybe this one's, let me see if I can articulate it right. Because the American dream, and
Hmm.
especially as we know it from our like parents' generation, because my mom also immigrated to the U.S. from South Korea when she was like 16 years old, and so I think it's often characterized by the promise of like economic prosperity,
Yeah.
greater stability, or yeah, just safety, right? Depending on where they're immigrating from, but I think now, at least from like the current generation, like what you're seeing in the students that you're supporting, would you say that the American dream has like shifted or is like kind of conceived a little bit differently? I'm just wondering, like, there's always that question of like, is the American dream alive and well?
Hmm.
Like, what are you seeing maybe from your own experience and your understanding of it, what it was like for you, kind of navigating the college admissions process? Or are you seeing anything change with students that you're currently supporting? Like, how drastic of a shift has it been? Or like, what are these students really kind of like looking ahead towards in terms of like hopefulness, in terms
Yeah.
of like, yeah, like the promises that are put out there in like, I don't know, the ether.
Hmm. I think it. I think the American dream is very much still alive for a lot of parents. But I think students, once they get to high school and they start learning about, the kind of social issues that are going on, what the job market looks like. I mean, even just looking at being able to buy a house or even afford groceries, these things weigh on young students, high schoolers and even younger, a lot more than parents may think. And especially for immigrant populations, right? Children of immigrants, children a lot of times of laborers, they mature and understand a lot more than students who don't really have to think about those things, right? They're not exposed to those things. So what I'm seeing is that yes, it's the dream is still alive for parents that where we come to this country with so many opportunities, maybe with that additional safety, like you said, depending on where they're coming from, and knowing, okay, my child, can go to school here, they can go to college, they can get a job. But I think that's also tied into now to the value of higher education that a lot of students are contemplating and they're considering, with the rise of just generative AI, also the rise of some job insecurity with federal funding for certain positions that students may want to go into. Young kids are thinking about a lot of these things. Maybe they don't have coherent thoughts about them yet. They don't know all of the information, but they're seeing a lot of this information on social media. I can go, down a rabbit hole while it's not great. I can go down a rabbit hole why it is great. But with social media, information is really accessible. And students will see that. They'll see, especially if they're looking into careers that are really well known, things like business, things like medicine, things like law, and they're seeing the impact and what's going on and how expensive it is as well. And if you're coming from a family where, right, you're making 20, 30, maybe $40,000 a year, you don't really see that as a realistic pathway for you, because one, you need to get to college first, and who's going to afford college, and can I even get into a good college, based on the grades, because I don't have that much time to commit to school because I'm working with my parents or I have to help support the family. So that's a little bit, I don't necessarily think very clear of an answer, but the dream is very much alive and well for the parents. But I think students are very quickly realizing that it's kind of that, it's a dream, it's a fantasy, and really the way that you look, where you come from in this country matters a lot. And sure, there are tons and bouts of opportunities, but the actual accessibility of those opportunities is the biggest consideration that I don't really think as many students, from these backgrounds that we're from, have access to that.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much, Neera. I mean, because you're like on the ground, like listening to a lot of these students share, um, what these dreams are,
Mhm.
and then it's kind of like interwoven with their parents' dreams, but then also what their own goals are and what their understanding is. When I think about like the word dream, it could be like a really like wonderful dream, or it could be
Mhm.
like a nightmare,
Yeah.
And it sounds like, for like a lot of the older generations, the dream um, was kind of like laid out in terms of like a set path, in terms of like this job can lead to this opportunity, can lead
Mhm.
to this opportunity. Of course, the reality of like having to work difficult jobs, sometimes like very much like long hours, that's not like a dream that could
Mhm.
be thought of as like a nightmare, but they had that like kind of like pathway. It sounds like the dream, at least for younger immigrants right now, is that there is no set pathway, right? Because
Yeah.
of the social media landscape, it's kind of just distorted or like
Mhm.
multiplied all of these different steps, and it can be overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so, in that case, it could be less so a dream and more like just, I don't know, delusion. I'm just thinking
Mhm.
about like the alliteration, dream, delusion. What is it? But they still have to like advance forward, right? They still have to take actions because of the support from their family. And so maybe that's like the next question that I have. Family expectations are a lot, right? And is there ever a ceiling to what those expectations can be when the stage is America, right? I mean, there's the
Yeah.
land of the free and the promise of like economic prosperity and everything. Become a millionaire or billionaire now. But for your own journey, the expectation for a long time was to become a doctor, and you said that while you really did enjoy science, probably still do enjoy science, you had to make a difficult decision to leave medical school after having spent 1 year, right,
Yeah.
starting this program. Maybe could you speak a little bit about was there any fallout from that decision, or
Yeah.
like, okay, so like what was that?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it was like, you living the American dream, and then
Mhm.
there was this kind of like fracturing that
Yeah.
both you and your parents felt. Could you maybe unpack a little bit of like what was going on
Yeah.
at that time?
Of course. So I actually want to answer a slightly different question first and
Of
then get
course.
into it.
Yeah.
And not necessarily answering the question, but bringing in a piece of the perspective. Is that something I realize a lot of immigrant parents, especially those who aren't highly educated formally and don't have those clear career paths for themselves in the US, try to flip their socioeconomic status in one generation. And so that pressure is typically placed on the children, typically the older children, to get these very high paying jobs to now, we're going from poverty to, you know, upper middle class, potentially even high class incomes, and trying to just, beeline it straight to success and high income. And I think that's where a lot of the doctoral or engineer expectation comes from. It's because these are well known careers, they're high paying careers, and trying to switch that social status in that one generation instead of working up towards it through multiple generations. And I think my parents fell into that same thing. They heard a lot from family as well of, this is what you have to do. You have to do these things to be successful. And so for them, they didn't think they could do it at the ages that they were at. So then, okay, my child can now do this. That's why I came here, to allow them these opportunities. So like a lot of that was really the mind space that my parents were coming from, and so that shapes the way that we had conversations. So now I'll get into your actual question. So when I started med school and I'd moved, I think when I had gotten into med school, I had already had a lot of these doubts. But I got in and was like the culmination of all the hard work I had done for 12 plus years. And so I was blinded a little bit by that excitement. And I had gotten a small scholarship to attend. It's like, oh yeah, this is so amazing. And so going now, and I'm excited to meet people. I'm excited to start, my medical education. I started the classes. It's like, okay, this is hard, but it's med school. It's hard for anybody, right? And those it's not hard for, I don't know, you're crazy, but it's hard. And so that piece of it, I'm not a stranger to hard work, and that was the piece of it that I'm telling my parents I'm really struggling. This is really hard for me. I'm not able to do well, and they're thinking that because it's hard I want to give up because it's difficult, and that's not the case. It took a lot of conversations to explain to them, yes, it's hard. It's not that I don't want to do it because it's hard. I don't want to do it, and that's making it even harder than it would be. Everyone thinks it's hard. All my friends think it's hard, right? We're studying till 2 a.m. sometimes. We're doing these study groups. We're in class for 10 hours of the day. It's difficult. It's a lot of content information to learn. So it's hard for everyone. But because I don't genuinely want to be here and do this, it's making it that much harder for me. And it took, 5, 6, 7 conversations in the fall of my first year to just even get that mindset across to them. But they also, shared with me, you've done all this whole hard work, you've gotten here, try to see it through, give yourself some more time. It's only been a few months. And so that part of the conversation was also helpful. That, okay, yeah, you're right. I am struggling now, but I haven't given my chance or myself that strong chance to get more involved in the atmosphere, to join as many organizations, to do a little bit more work and research. So let me, I'm here. Let me make use of where I am. And so in the first, my med school was broken up into trimesters. So in that first trimester in the fall, that's where all the struggles happening. The initial, this really sucks, having these hard conversations. Um, and a little snippet that's added in there is that my girlfriend at the time, she's now my wife, so we're still together, but she was my girlfriend at the time, started working in EOF at another institution in New Jersey, but working on the programming side with students. And she'd tell me about what she's doing, and I told her, I said, I feel like you're living my life. And that when she had told me about her job and I'm learning about what she's doing, that's when it really, really clicked that that is what I want to do. I don't want to do medicine. But going back to the kind of the main theme with my parents. So second trimester now for school, I'm getting involved. I'm doing really well in classes. I got a e-board leadership position for the medical educators group. I'm kind of finding the niche that I want to go into, really interested in women's health, reproductive health, and going down that path. I'm like, okay, it's feeling pretty good. I'm in a groove now. I think I can see this through. And now we're kind of into the spring, into the third trimester, and I'm having these thoughts again that this sucks. I don't want to do this. I'm not having a good time. So now I bring it back up to my parents. This is after 3 months of me not really saying much. They're thinking I'm fine now. I say, hey guys, like I don't want to do this. I really, really don't. I've talked to my friends, and when I ask them, how do you know you want to do this, or why are you doing medicine? And they say, because I can't see myself as anything else but a doctor. And to me, like I can see myself as a lot of other things than a doctor. And so that too started shaping the conversation. At one point, my dad just got really upset and kind of stopped talking to me about it. He's like, "Do whatever you want to do," and just angry. And my mom, they're having their own challenges with life and whatever. And she, I think, got to a point too. It's like, all right, we were talking about this, going in circles. Make the decision that you want to make, kind of thing. And so that was hard. It felt like, yes, I had some support, but they were really unhappy about it. And after I said, okay, I'm not going to just fully withdraw. I still have the opportunity to go back, but let me take a year. It's just 1 year of life. Let me take the leave of absence, try something else. I can still go back. I'm not officially withdrawing. So it's still an option, but I don't want to get to fourth year of med school. I'm now going into residency and I still feel like this. Now I'm several $100,000 in debt and still unhappy. And at that point, I'm going to feel even more stuck and like I don't have an option. So I think that conversation that really helped them understand, okay, yeah, she's just taking a chance, still exploring, giving herself a little bit of time. And then knowing med school was still an option if I wanted to go back, kind of appeased them a little bit. So that was that. It was a lot of difficulty, and I think my dad at one point he had mentioned, my dream for you was to you be a doctor, and then we can like go back to Trinidad and fund a school or a hospital for students. And I'm like, Dad, do you know how much money that takes to do those things? It's not just a doctor's salary. That maybe can happen in 20 years, and I understand from him he wants to go back because he grew up in extreme poverty in Trinidad, and so he wanted to give back to his culture and his community. And to me, it's funny, I didn't even say this to him. My mom told this to him after I had started working at TCNJ. She told me about this conversation she had with my dad. And she mentioned to him, because she knew what I did for work, he didn't really know that much. And she told him, Neera's still changing lives, not in the way that you thought she was going to, but she's giving these students these access and these opportunities. She's the one who can admit them into school, who can give them, this fund, give them these opportunities to still pursue higher ed. Sure, she's not literally physically saving their lives in a hospital, but she is still changing lives from communities. And it's maybe not, back in our home country, but still making an impact. And when my mom told me that conversation and she's sharing what she told my dad, that's how I knew she fully internalized why I made the decision. So at that point, I'm like, good, my mom got it. My dad's my dad. We have a rocky relationship, but I think he's gotten over it too. And going to Harvard doesn't hurt, right? Getting my master's from Harvard absolutely doesn't hurt. He's like, okay, all right, I get. So that was again a long answer to your question, but I want to give you a lot more context too.
No, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that context, and the long answer is the only answer, right? To properly understand what was really taking place, because that sounded like an incredibly difficult conversation to have,
Mm-hmm.
one that was built up over years and years and years, right, of expectation, and it was very strategic of you, right, to take like a gap year or like the leave of absence, and then it was very wise as well, right, to kind of like really like listen to that like gut feeling that you
Mm-hmm.
had, that like I might be something like more than just a doctor, right? Which is hard to think about, right? Because they're like, but doctor's the pinnacle, like it's
Yeah.
the best. I'm like, well, it's a career, right? It's
Yeah.
you are suited to a specific career, and you have to, I mean, especially if you're investing that much time and money into it, really be committed to it. And so, how you went about finding your own niche in college admissions, higher ed, I think it's great that your parents were, especially your mom, was able to really understand the kind of like impact that you make on other people's lives. And then the whole thing about your father's story about wanting to kind of start a school in Trinidad and
Mm-hmm.
Tobago, like yeah, it's so important. I think we can like ride that tendency of like out of like like what is it, filial piety, right? Like I
Hmm.
want to do everything I can, right, to give back and like you know like make sure I do right by my parents, but not so much that you're just living their life, right? And I think that's the struggle with a lot of like immigrant families, is that what is that balance between like you and your narrative and them
Hmm.
and their narrative, because both are equal value, right? But I
Yeah.
mean, when you shared about like your father having experienced extreme poverty growing up, um, it's so easy to think, wow, like he had a much tougher life, right?
Hmm.
His There's something about his life that I need to really pay attention to,
Yeah.
but not at the detriment of your own life. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, I say that because my mom also, she speaks about growing up in abject poverty, like 10 other brothers and sisters, not enough food on a farm on the coast of Korea. And I'm just like, I have no idea what that means. I
Hmm.
would, I I I always think back like when I was like in middle school, that like I would want, I was begging for like an Xbox, and my mom's like, like, do you know what I got for Christmas? I got like a little piece of hard candy that they hit with a hammer, and it was like a fragment of that because it had
Hmm.
to be shared. And then here I was a little brat wanting an Xbox. So totally different. I'm like, how do I empathize with that? But,
Yeah.
I think as we get older and we have those tough conversations with our parents, inevitably we come to realize that, yeah, our journeys are connected, but they're off in different directions. And there's a lot that we're doing that will make them proud. It's not just about the money or
Yeah.
the prestige. But the next question that I wanted to ask you about is more, to the topic of this podcast, global citizenship. So, some people might, like listening to your story right now, think, oh wow, Neera's totally a global citizen because she grew up in one country, and then I mean, she was born in one country and then grew up in another, and probably interacts with a lot of different ethnic backgrounds. But is there something more to this idea of like being a global citizen that maybe you can speak to? Because you yeah, it sounds like your perspective on like really supporting students in like low income minority groups. It's not to say it's only one particular nationality, or there's differences, right, that abound with each of their stories, and you're trying to help them gain access to great school. So what is it about like this topic of global citizenship that maybe like resonates with you? Was it something that you consider in the work that you're doing right now with your students? Is it something that you've heard about, growing up at any point? I'm
Hmm.
just curious about like what's like the initial touch point, and then kind of where does that resonate with you at this current moment?
Yeah. So I think for me, when I think about global citizenship and what it is, I probably didn't really hear the term until post college. I don't really think I ever heard it that much in college explicitly stated like that. But as I learned more about the actual term, was probably in med school or maybe even at Harvard when I first actually heard it formally, said as global citizen. But thinking back to just experiences, work, things that I've been taught, when I think about global citizenship, what's the themes that are really wrapped up in there is it's not just going to other countries and traveling and seeing the world, right? That's just, maybe being like culturally exposed to a lot of different places. But really being a global citizen, you can be one having never left the US, right? So it's being educated about others' experiences, in different countries, understanding different types of cultures. Maybe you don't need to know the basis or the roots behind certain traditions and religious beliefs and things like that, but just knowing that there are these differences, wanting to know a little bit more about them, knowing what people do to celebrate and how they interact with the world. I mean, I mentioned Trinidad's really communalistic versus the US is individualistic. Those subtle differences between cultures and communities, knowing those, and also then bringing that into the work that you do and how you interact with other people. It's just recognizing, even in the same town, same school, same small environment, people have these vastly different backgrounds from different countries. They have different ancestry. They have different home cultures. Maybe they are from another country, or some great grandparents are from another country. But all of that still impacts the type of values that they have. And so when I really think about global citizenship, it's about learning about different cultures and people. It's having that respect and openness to know that there are differences and recognize that, each person's perspective on the world, because of how they were socialized and how they grew up, is unique, and it's also just as valuable as yours. You may have certain beliefs that you're very strong and held on to, um, but you shouldn't think someone else's. Maybe you think it's wrong, right? But you're not going to actively disrespect them because of it. And I think the only time it becomes an issue is if your beliefs are actively targeting and disrespecting other people's. But if it's just a difference of belief, difference of opinion, difference of approach, then it's okay being able to have respectful conversations about differences. Um, Also, a lot of things, like I think about empathy, I think about compassion for others, I think about openness to communication, uh, being able to listen and just hear about others. Those are the kind of themes and things that I think about when I hear global citizenship. For me, I think two piece of it is a lot of education, which honestly I'm not as well educated about some moral topics that I want to be, and that's just me right now making an excuse. I just haven't made as much time for it. But that's part of it too, is also knowing the bad things that are going on in the world and just understanding how we can play a role in that, even if we're not these grand politicians and being in high positions of power. There's still things that we can do to enact positive change in the world and make contributions to things that we see as wrong. So that's kind of overall the things that I think about global citizenship and what it means.
Amazing, right? I think, well, to be able to convey that, and also you're saying it kind of quite transparently. You're like, I think I only heard this concept like recently, like
Hmm.
in med school or at the start of like Harvard. So that's probably like what 2-3 years
Yeah.
ago. But you're drawing from your own experiences, right? And what kind of like makes sense in terms of how maybe your own formation kind of like led you to like, yeah, like really think about like, oh yeah, these differences, right? And the community that I'm in, what does that mean? What about my own like kind of like trips, back to Trinidad and Tobago, and like what's going on with the different traditions and yeah, the celebrations part of it, and yeah, education awareness. It's not to say like, oh, you need to like listen to the
Yeah.
newsreel nonstop, because that's actually not healthy either, because it's just too overwhelming. But having a concern for people living in far off places, because there's the sense that like, yeah, they're still figuring out themselves. They have their own doubts. They're humans, and yet the challenges that they're experiencing, like how could you possibly fathom what a war torn country really is if that's not been your experience, right? And yeah, rural versus urban, and probably just numerous things. But is having that curiosity that I think is really important. But it doesn't. I don't think it just comes about all of a sudden, right? I mean, we have so many influences in our lives, like our parents, our immediate like community, different groups that we frequent, and yeah, schools that we attend. But I'm curious because, like, in terms of like what you've experienced growing up like, in New Jersey, did you say that there was any particular individual or again group association that made a larger impact on how you see these differences, right? How you approach them, like to see them as something more positive than rather negative. Like, is there
Hmm.
any someone or group that comes to
Um,
mind?
I don't I don't have a specific thing in mind, because I think New Jersey, like you said earlier on, it's a very ethnically diverse place. There's a very high Caribbean culture and population in New Jersey. There's a lot of different immigrants from different, countries here. And so, especially where I grew up as well, the high school that I went to, I don't really think we had a certain minority or majority group, where it was a really diverse high school. I had friends from, kind of all different backgrounds. And so to me, the experience that I had growing up, I saw a lot of people that looked really different from me. It was very normal to me. I was used to it. I had friends from, all different races, and we had different backgrounds. Some of us were immigrants, some of us were not, some were higher income than others. I think being exposed to just those differences, not just in culture, but socioeconomic status as well. And when people talk about diversity, a lot of that times they only think about race and ethnicity, but it's
Mhm.
also political, affiliation, it's religious affiliations, socioeconomic class, gender and sexuality. And so all of that really was very, very diverse in every sense of the word where I grew up. So I can't really pinpoint one thing specifically. I think more so when I started to recognize differences and really see those is when I got to college. And that's when I started to really understand and value. So I'm a citizen. I was naturalized. My parents came up to the U.S. My dad had his papers filed a long time ago. He got approved. My mom took and him took the exam, and I got naturalized because I was young enough. I always knew I was a citizen. It was never a big deal to me. It's like, okay, whatever. A lot of my family are not citizens as well. I have, some family who are still undocumented. Um, but now, or right now, in the being in college, I really started to recognize the value of that citizenship. When I met friends who were still very diverse, but they themselves were, they were documented immigrants, but didn't really have paperwork, official, they weren't citizens. They were really just here on, they were either, oh my gosh, I'm completely, they were DACA students. A lot of them maybe didn't have some of these supports. So I started understanding the value of that. Friends would talk about some of the things that they're struggling with, and I started to see that with my own extended family. And so I think they really helped me learn a lot more, being separated from that really positive environment I had growing up, not really seeing a lot of that negativity and not really a lot of racism or really classism or anything like that. I started to see that in college, and then I started to appreciate what I had growing up. And then, so yeah, I think in college, I got really angry about a lot of things. I rejected religion for a lot of it. I would, yeah, I really, really valued and appreciated being a citizen. I was mad at my parents for bringing me to this country. It's like, why am I here? Um, so, this is 2016 election, and a lot of things changed at that time too. So that was like not as much of a positive answer to your question, but that's me kind of learning a little bit more about just citizenship in general, but also just interacting with the world and different types of people in the community I grew up in. And so I'm very thankful for what I had growing up. That it I never really felt like an outsider because everyone was different and we all appreciated it.
Totally. No, no, I appreciate. I didn't think that answer was negative at all. Actually, I think it
Okay.
was perfectly um, justified in the kind of different tensions, right? Kind of
Hmm.
pulling against you, the exposure to like one kind of form of your community, right? Growing up in New Jersey, as opposed to in college, as opposed to medical school, and then all these other different spheres that you kind of navigated, because it's good to see like those contrasts, right? It
Hmm.
helps you gain that appreciation, that perspective, and then grow your empathy, right? Because valuing what you have, where you've come from, where your parents have come from, and yeah, and I think that being able to embrace the complexities of of that struggle allows you to not only be resilient but also realize that like, oh wow, I've been, like whether you kind of came across the term global citizen recently or not, all of those kind of like like exposures, like you were talking about, the engagements, the questions, the doubts, all of that can be very useful in kind of like solidifying your own understanding of like, oh yeah, this is, yeah, I could get behind this. This is something that I think might be helpful, like language, right, around like what is next, right? Because like the political situation has only intensified, at least in the U.S., right, and a lot of other places too. But there's just so much about like not wanting to embrace certain differences,
Hmm.
that yeah, is becoming very like kind of demonized, right, like kind of vilified, and yet as you've shared, right, all of that is kind of like this like beautiful totality of like, but yeah, this is kind of what's led me to be who I am,
Hmm.
and allowed you to see a lot of beauty in the communities that were quite different from yours. So all of that is to say, I'm like, you've always been a global citizen era, and I appreciate you sharing so much of like the context around like what led you to be who you are and like make the decisions that you've made, very difficult decisions. But ultimately, it sounds like you're in a profession that you are really like excited about, that you're making impact, and
Yeah.
you're hopeful about not only the students that you're serving, but even for yourself, right? Still kind of walking down this new path that I'm sure your parents already, right? You've said are taking note of like, wow, this is why you're doing it. But they probably don't even realize like now 5, 10 years later what that actually is going to reveal. So
Yeah.
I've got a lot of hope it's going to be even
Thanks.
better. But yeah, so I wanted, we're kind of coming up to the end of our conversation, and really appreciate you, Neera, for sharing so much of your story. Being vulnerable as well to share some of like the stuff, especially with like your parents.
Yeah.
And the last question is a recommendation, if you have one for like either book, movie, anything.
Okay. Well, actually, I have two recommendations.
Of
So,
course.
first one, talked about this briefly before, is going to be Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think, especially the show, there, right? It's marketed as a kids show, but there are a lot of themes of, right? There's war in there. There's loss. There's newfound community. There's so many things that you can actually learn and relate to. There's growth arcs, redemption arcs in the show, and so seeing beyond just it being a cartoon, there's a lot of really good themes in there that I think on the theme of global citizenship, you could actually learn a lot from the show. The second recommendation is actually a book that was recommended to me recently after a conversation with my boss. It's called Sapiens. And so it's really just about the kind of history of the development of humans, a little bit more from an evolution and anthropology perspective. But I think learning that, if someone is interested and open to it, can help you recognize how connected we all are and really how we developed just as a species. So one that's a little more like personal, light-hearted, and then a recommendation that's a little more academic, a little more based in, some themes that people might enjoy.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Neera. I've actually seen Avatar: The Last Airbender multiple times, so definitely a great show. And then Sapiens, yeah, definitely gives you that like kind of bigger picture, like higher vantage point as far as just where humans have been, and
Yeah,
then hopefully understanding where it's all going towards. So great recommendations and great conversation. I thank you so
thanks.
much, Neera. I wanted to give the last word to you if you have like just like a final send off or final thought as we're just wrapping up this conversation about your journey and global citizenship.
Yeah, I think I would probably say, really just to wrap up that for everyone listening, whoever's gonna take a look at this, that right, we're all part of this world. We're all parts of certain communities and cultures, but at the end of the day, Earth's a miracle or the only planet, right? All those kind of like sciencey big things, but everyone has a responsibility to the planet as a environment, but also to the planet as in the peoples that inhabit it. And right, that doesn't mean you have to make huge political changes and be part of every advocacy or protest, event that's happening, but making those small changes daily in your life to be more educated and involved, to maybe have difficult conversations with some family members that you may not want to have, and just making small contributions to the world, even to one person, is contributing to making it a better place. So taking that kind of civic responsibility to people and to the world, if everyone just takes a little bit of the responsibility, we'll all kind of be in a better place.